Hey, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health Matters. This is Tom Duff with St. Louis Counseling. If you're curious about our services and our programs, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. So, the podcast that promotes to break down the stigma that makes mental health okay to talk about around the dinner table, you have tuned into it. This is Mental Health Matters. So, as always, we have great and entertaining and informative guests, and today is no different. We have Lisa Jakub with us. Hello, Lisa. How are you?
Hey Tom, I'm good. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on. And so Lisa is an author, a mental wellness advocate, has a podcast, Embrace Your Weird podcast, talks about mental health in general, former child actress, right? So lots of different things that you're bringing to the table. And so for us, when we're on Mental Health Matters here, the goal is to really kind of just talk about mental health and emotional health and just normalize it and help people realize that we all have mental health. But my first question for you, right? And when I was looking through your bio and everything, you also said dog mom, right?
Oh,
Uh,
very important.
what kind of dog do you have, and what's the names or names?
So I have a very anxious rescue dog named Olive. We adopted her about 3 years ago, and she had been pretty badly abused and neglected, and she was a complete disaster when she came to us. So it's actually been really interesting. I work with anxiety, my own and other people's. It totally makes sense that I would adopt a really anxious dog. It was not my plan. She kind of fell into our lap, but it really helps me, I think, to realize that in a lot of ways anxiety is normal. Animals have anxiety too. Animals who have been through trauma have a hard time working through it. And at the same time, it's really inspiring for me because I see her kind of healing from her past and moving through it and learning to trust and learning to play and all these other things. And so it's very interesting the way that kind of working with her has mirrored my own life and my work.
Yeah, isn't it something when you really slow down and think about animals as well too? And when we talk about anxiety in general, that a lot of times it's easy to see, right? The fireworks are going off or the thunder, whatever it may be. It's easy to see the anxiety there, but it's present in just everyday occurrences, and how much of that is just like us too, in so many levels, so many
Yeah,
levels.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
Dog Mom yoga as well too. Yeah, I definitely looked at your website. So many things to dive into. But first, let's talk about this mental wellness advocate part of you, right? So, as an advocate, what called you to do that? And then why did you have or how did you find the courage to bring this to the forefront? Because it's hard sometimes to talk about these aspects. So what's your story in that sense?
Yeah, it really makes no sense that I am a mental health speaker and advocate and educator because it requires me to do everything that makes me anxious. So I have struggled with anxiety and depression my entire life. I had my first panic attack when I was 11 years old. It has just been something that is, a part of my life, a part of my personality, a part of my DNA. And for a long time, I just really tried to hide that. I thought I was a freak. I thought I was a weirdo. I thought I was having all these struggles and everybody else was fine, so I was the problem. And so I think when I really started working with a therapist, doing cognitive behavioral therapy, through that I found meditation. Through meditation, I found yoga, and it all sort of unfolded in this really beautiful and helpful way. And then, when I wrote my first book, which was a memoir about growing up in the film industry and then making the decision, the very unpopular decision
Hmm.
to leave LA and leave my 18-year career as an actor behind and move on to do something else, I would talk about my anxiety just sort of in a little fleeting way that you do in a memoir when you don't
Uh-huh.
really want to dive into it. And when my first book came out, that was all anybody wanted to talk about. And
Hmm.
they just kept saying to me, "Oh my God, you have anxiety. I have anxiety. I've never told anyone. I don't know what to do about it. Can we please talk about this?" And so it was through that that I realized, like, oh, I have my second book.
Hmm.
This is really what we are starving to talk about these days, and how we want to feel less alone, how we want to know what tools are available. And so that was really how I started talking about it, because I realized that in sharing my story, it wasn't just like, oh, hey, everybody, look at me. I want to be the center of attention. It was when I can own my story and share the things that I experience, it allows other people to be vulnerable as well. It allows other people to not be ashamed of the things that they are going through. And so when I finally kind of made that switch in my mind, that I realized it wasn't about me, it was about really helping people access the things they needed to feel a little bit better in their lives, it got a little bit easier.
Yeah, when you mentioned that part of when people understand they're not alone, then right, they're reading this book and you're like, you have it, I have it. Is this I'm not so abnormal, or I'm just not from outer space, and I'm somebody that can relate to you then, and for you to be able to use your platform in that sense, and the door that opened up to this is, by telling your story of being in the film industry as a child, opened up the door to this. And mental health right now is so, I mean, it's better. There's still stigma, right? But I do think
Sure.
like this past year of COVID kind of helped mental health become a little bit more mainstream. Like we hear it all
Yeah.
the time now. And so
Yeah.
I'm sure you're probably getting, even, from the yoga that you do and your sessions, probably more people that you wouldn't expect all of a sudden now are kind of opening some doors.
Yeah, and I think, in some cases, it's people who have never had anxiety before, who are all of a sudden faced with, oh my God, I am so out of control. I can't, use the tools that I'm used to using for stress relief. I, feel like everything is so uncertain now when I thought I really had my life planned out. And so I think there are a lot of people who maybe thought anxiety was a little bit overblown, or they didn't completely understand it, now have had this experience of like, oh my God, I get it now. I get what this is to have that lump in your throat, to have the pit in the stomach, to just be feeling like you don't even know how to take that next breath. And while I hate that anybody has to go through that, I do think that to a large extent it has kind of cracked open this whole conversation even more than it was.
When the therapist side of me, when I'm working with people, and a lot of times anxiety and depression go hand in hand on so many
Mhm.
levels. There's so much connection there, and for
Yeah.
some people it's really hard to understand if you haven't experienced it, right? It's hard to understand what someone else is going through. Can you kind of describe, maybe, in words, or just almost imagery in some sense, what that feels like, to have those anxious moments or that world of panic? Because I think a lot of
Hmm.
times we have to paint that picture for
Hmm.
others to help them have that empathy to help others.
I think for me, what always stands out about the feelings of anxiety or feelings of depression is this sense that it's going to last forever. This sense that, this is permanent, this is just how I am, this is what I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my days. And that is what is really painful and difficult about it all, is that it does not seem like, oh, this is just like I'm having a bad day, right? This is not a case of the Mondays, right? This
Hmm.
is like this is my destiny for the rest of forever. And I think that maybe that is a difference for someone who hasn't experienced it, to feel like, oh, we all get down sometimes, we all kind of feel sad. This feels more like it will be terminal, like it will be the death of you, and that there will never be anything good ever again. And I think that is what really kind of allows people to fall into that really like dark place where you feel like you're sitting at the bottom of the well and you're never going to get out. And so, yeah. And then, I always like to explain panic attacks this way, that the vast majority of people, when they are experiencing their first panic attack, end up in the emergency room because it feels like a heart attack. It feels like you are dying. And so it's not just a sense of feeling a little bit nervous. Again, it feels like a life or death situation. And it has all of the physical components as well. Of course, you're sweating, and you can't. Well, this is my experience anyway. That I can't feel my hands. Like my hands go numb, my heart is pounding. My mouth goes dry. I get really sick to my stomach. I feel lightheaded, like I'm gonna pass out. And it really is that whole mind-body connection with anxiety, depression, and panic attacks that really got me interested in the yoga piece and the mindfulness piece of your body experiences everything along with your mind. So why not learn to work with the body so that you can help learn how to self-soothe, how to walk yourself through these really difficult things?
Well, first of all, thank you for explaining that, right? Because I know sometimes that means you got to go to that spot and think about some of those aspects of, not feeling good.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that. And, for those that are listening out there, it's that ability then to take what they just heard from you and then try to say, okay, so if I knew I was going to be stuck in this awful situation for the rest of my life, that's what that would feel like, and then you start kind of peeling back the layers to help understand that. And and so that panic attack feels like your heart's going to stop, that is serious, and so I think, when we can hear, someone, such as yourself put that into words, it's so powerful because, one of the things we're constantly preaching is, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and why is that any different, in that instance? Just because our thoughts and our emotions are affected, and not just maybe a muscle on our arm or something along that level. And so when we can understand it on those levels, it equals some normalcy, Now you mentioned yoga, right? So I got into yoga a little bit through Yoga with Adrienne. I'm a Yoga with Adrienne guy,
her.
Yes. So discovered her a few years back, and the 30 days, and I'm like, this is amazing, because I never tried it before, and I had recently just kind of trying to still be an athlete at my age doesn't work, right? So I'm like, okay, I just need to try to do some stretching and stuff. And I'm like, this actually is a hard workout, for one. And then two, I just feel so good. So you yourself, you teach, right? You're an instructor. And, when maybe also be able to put in words, what does that do for your spirit when you're into yoga and you're doing it, and you've given yourself into that practice? What does that do for your spirit? What have you experienced, and what do you see from others?
Oh, such a great question. It is kind of challenging, actually, to put into words everything that yoga has done for me. I started practicing, maybe about 12 years ago, and completely did it for the mental wellness benefits. had no interest in the physical side of it at all. But I thought, I'd been meditating for several years by then and thought, yoga and meditation, those are somehow connected, right? So maybe yoga would be good for me. And so I went, and what I've found with it is just this really effective way to focus my attention. Mm-hmm. And that is an incredibly simple way to think about it. But for me, my mind, like most other people's minds, loves to obsess about the future and loves to obsess about the past. Mm-hmm. And so what a yoga practice has taught me is how to be in the moment. And in the moment is when we can learn how to work with our physical body, work with our parasympathetic nervous system to help bring down all of the adrenaline and cortisol that we get when we go into that fight, flight, or freeze state. And so that is really what yoga taught me how to do, was when I am feeling stressed, I go to my yoga mat. That is the way that I have learned to work with the emotions that feel like they are just going to absolutely take over my entire life. I taught my niece when I was visiting. They live in California. I was visiting once when she was about 5, and I taught her a couple of yoga postures. And she said to me after our first time of doing yoga together, I feel so good. She just kept saying, I feel so good. And a few weeks later, she was having a 5-year-old temper tantrum, the way that 5-year-olds do. And she stopped and she took a deep breath and she went and got the yoga mat that I had got for her. And her mom was like, what are you doing? And she said, Mom, this helps me feel calm. And she walked over and she did yoga postures. And I was like, what I would have given to have learned this when I was 5.
Yes.
That there are scientifically proven ways to work with the breath, work with the body, work with the mind, so that you don't feel like you're being held hostage by your emotions. And so those are just like a sprinkling of some of the things that the yoga practice has done for me, and why I became a teacher. Which again makes absolutely no sense because I don't like it when people look at me. So the fact that I teach this stuff is very counterintuitive. But again, it was one of those things where I felt like this had benefited me to such a massive degree that I had to share it with other people, because I didn't think enough people were talking about yoga in that way. Mm-hmm. It's a lot about, oh, you can get stretchy and get a cute yoga butt. That's side effects, whatever, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
That's secondary gains, yeah.
Exactly. But it really is this ability to be with yourself and your emotions and ride that wave and know that this too shall pass. You will get through this.
Yeah, that is a great way of explaining that question I asked, because it's so hard for me to put into words like that vibe I feel afterwards, and when you talk about riding that wave, right? And all of a sudden those emotions kick in, and for the anxious mind, right? What better method than to not think about all those other things you're supposed to be doing, or all the things that could end up this way or that way or forever, right? Than to be able to get to that state of mind to focus on the here and the now. So that was great. I love firing questions at you because you're responding good. Yeah, this is awesome.
I'm glad.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Glad I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you're doing excellent. So talk a little bit about the podcast, Embrace Your Weird. Love the name, first of all, because you're putting a positive tone on that word. So yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I just love being able to have a variety of different ways to get messages out. And so I wanted to do a podcast because people's lives are busy, right? They don't necessarily have time to like sit down and read an entire book about anxiety.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to do a podcast. The episodes have a variety of lengths, but a lot of them are like 15 minutes. So, maybe it's your commute to work, maybe it's as you're cooking dinner, like to just have these small pieces of information and tools to kind of work with your anxiety and realize that it is not something to be ashamed of. And so some of the episodes are just me talking about topics that I think are really important. I do interviews with other people. One of the groups of folks that I love doing interviews with, I work a lot with combat veterans.
Hmm.
And so I love talking to vets and talking to them about the things that are challenging for them, talking about post-traumatic stress, talking about moral injury, talking about those things that are really important. And a lot of times civilians don't have a ton of interaction with veterans, and we don't know kind of what they're dealing with. And I certainly knew nothing before I started working with vets about 5 years ago.
Hmm.
And I think it's incredibly useful to understand what other people go through and what they have found can be helpful for them, because a lot of the things, okay, so maybe you haven't been deployed 5 times to Afghanistan. That doesn't mean as a civilian that you haven't experienced trauma, that you haven't
Hmm.
experienced stress. So can we kind of cross over that line that tends to demarcate between like civilian and veteran? Can we really connect and learn from each other and help support each other, even though our experiences might feel really different?
Well, that concept of moral injury, right? That is, oh, we could probably spend hours talking about that. But that concept of, you know, well, and even fight or flight too, because we've done some work with some of our National Guard here in Missouri as well too, and how people are wired with fight or flight, and then if you're wired for flight, but then you join the military and you're then been be told to fight, what that does to the wiring on the inside, and the anxious world you live in then, and the things you're asked to do or the things you have to do, when it comes to those moral parts of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So great that you're opening those doors for individuals to talk about that.
And I think hypervigilance is something that a lot of military members really struggle with. Just this idea that they cannot relax. They cannot kind of be off duty and kind of feel like, oh, okay, I can just take it easy. It's always being alert, always watching your six, always, surveying the territory to try to keep themselves and others alive. And so trying to deprogram that is really, really challenging. And again, not just combat vets that have that. A lot of people who have experienced trauma have that hypervigilance. And so that is where it becomes just so incredibly useful to, work with the nervous system, to work on how do we retrain the body after everything it's gone through.
Well, and you think about, everyone has that story, and you mentioned, like people with trauma as well too, and when we start slowing down to listen to each other, right, and we form relationships, and we begin to have those open conversations, we get to have that better understanding. And if we all continue to live in that bubble, right, this is my world and everything's okay in my world, and you stay in your bubble, those are the things that it doesn't create change. And change is of course what we need, I think, a lot, in this world we live in. And those conversations are so important, from that standpoint. um, you mentioned, the first book you wrote, talking about growing up in the film industry, right? So you're in Mrs. Doubtfire, Independence Day, a couple other aspects, a couple other films and things of that world. But the stress, right? From being the child in that industry. Do you think that's impacted you still today? And is that stuff you're continuing to work on as you go from that standpoint?
It's funny because I get the question a lot of, all the pressure you were under as a kid actor. Did that cause your anxiety? So I started working as an actor when I was 4. So it was pretty much my entire life. It was what I did between the ages of 4 and 22. So it's interesting. It's such a chicken and the egg situation,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, was I anxious and sensitive? So that made me a good actor because, I could cry just like that.
Mm-hmm.
That takes nothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could be really empathic and I can, get into the skin of characters and all that sort of stuff. Or did it have to do with, the pressures of being on set and not really having stability and normalcy? I didn't really go to school, I didn't kind of have any of those normal things. And, the pressures of being in an adult environment and being exposed to lots of adult things sooner than I was ready and all of those sorts of things. And I don't know the answer to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bit of both. It gets down to nature or nurture, and I think it's both. Um, I think, it was it was a really good thing for me to leave the film industry when I left. My anxiety was really bad. My depression was really bad. I was very unhappy. And so it was such a good decision for me to leave, even though it was incredibly difficult. And I had no idea what I was going to do with
Mm-hmm.
my life if I wasn't an actor. It's all I had ever known. And so that, leaving LA was really stressful too. And so I think once I left, I really had the time and the space to start working on my mental health. And I think I came to terms with a lot of things. I, resolved a lot of things. And I think I really got to this point where I no longer wanted to run away from my past as an
Mm-hmm.
actor, because I did definitely go through this phase where people would recognize me and be like, "Hey, weren't you the girl from Mrs. Doubtfire?" And I'd be like, "No," and then I'd run away.
Uh-huh.
And that didn't work really well. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I got through the phase of trying to deny a big part of my life and who I was, and gained this acceptance that I had amazing experiences. I got to meet wonderful people. I got to travel, and everything that I did back then brought me to this moment. And this moment's great, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a journey that I'm really glad I went on. And I think, I would have been anxious either way, but I think I got to this place where I was able to really kind of work on it and get to a much better place where I still have anxiety. I
Mm-hmm.
still get depressed sometimes, but I have the tools to pull myself out of it more effectively than I ever have.
Yeah, so that journey of know thyself. So I'm a big proponent of that emotional intelligence side, and then getting to know thyself and what makes you tick. But I think one of the great things you brought up there was the fact that the chicken or the egg. How did this happen to me, and how did anxiety come about, and can I point a finger at one specific thing? And I think that's what people struggle with so much, is they want to know why. Why do I have anxiety, and why do I have it at this level instead of this level? And 100%, to me, it's always a combination of things. And that's the thing. It's hard to point, but you're dealt that card. And how do you then start to cope with it? How do you build upon that? How do you embrace it? And embrace who you are as well too, because you can spend a lot of time just trying to figure out the why. And where did it start? Where did it come from? Were my parents this way? Was the other actors I around this way? And the reality is, you know what? It's a combination. It's all part of the story.
Absolutely. And I think the other side of that that's really important to remember is that yes, anxiety is part of it and part of you, but it also is kind of a superpower in a lot of ways. Like I am anxious, but part of that anxiety is because I'm really sensitive. And so part of that sensitivity is that I'm really empathetic towards other people. I'm really observant about the world around me. I'm really in tune with the energy when I walk into a room. Are people feeling good? Are people feeling a little bit antsy, right? Like there are so many things in my life that are good and important and helpful and beneficial that are all tangled up with my anxiety. Right. So it's really easy to be like, oh, I just wish I could just wake up tomorrow and I wouldn't be anxious ever again. I also wouldn't be empathetic ever again. I wouldn't have all of these different things. I don't think I would be the writer that I am if I didn't have anxiety. I just wouldn't be me without it. And so I think it's so easy to want to kind of throw it all into one bucket and decide it's all bad. And I think when you really unpeel a lot of the layers, it's more complicated than that. And so I don't know if somebody offered me a magic wand and said like, oh, anxiety would be gone forever. I don't know, maybe that would seem nice, but I would worry that there would be so many other parts of me that would go with it.
Well, I think that's a huge part of this whole podcast is the strengths part of, yes, you might be dealing with a mental health diagnosis and a mental health condition or an issue or an emotional health, whatever you want to call it, but there's strengths to that, right? And then when you take the time to figure out yourself and who you are, and then you build upon those strengths, like with writing, right? Like you said, you wouldn't be the maybe writer you are without some of that anxiety. It's doing wonderful things, right? It's putting you with a platform to talk about this and to help others, even though, like you said, you don't like people looking at you, right? It's this ability to say, you know what, it might make me anxious, but I'm willing to talk about it, and I'm willing to bring it because I want someone else to kind of feel some of the successes that I have through this. So this has been an amazing podcast. I thank you for the time that you've given to us today.
My pleasure.
If someone's interested in your podcast, where can they find it at?
Yes, so you can get it at all the regular places, iTunes, Stitcher, it's on Spotify, and you can also go to my website. It is on there, so that is reallisajakub.com. And I'm on all the social media places as well, so anybody can connect with me there, and I'll send you over to the podcast.
Perfect. And your books, where can they find? Yeah. Probably on the website too, right?
Yes, go to the website. It has everything that you need. But my first book is You Look Like That Girl, and second book is Not Just Me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've got a couple new social media followers after today. At least Debbie and I are all about that. And once again, this has been St. Louis Counseling's Mental Health Matters podcast. If you're curious about our services, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. Remember, you got to spell out Saint. And until next time, remember, mental health matters.